Welcome to Real Scary, the home of true, scary stories, where we bring you the most unnerving of content. From British ghost stories to the most gruesome of murders. If you are quite partial to a scary story, you're in the right place. This is a story regarding a quaint little hamlet nestled away in the beautiful Kent countryside, and which on the surface appears no different from any other quaint little hamlet throughout England. However, this hamlet has a considerably dark and disturbing past. This is the story of Pluckley, the most haunted village in England. Pluckley is a quintessentially small English village and civil parish situated in the Ashford district of Kent, England, that has a residential population of little over 1,000 and a mix of beautiful cottages and picturesque country houses. And Pluckley appears to be a perfectly normal place to live. It paints itself as what an archetypal Old English village looks like. But if you slightly scratch beneath the surface, it becomes apparent that all is not as it seems. And things start to change somewhat once the darkness arrives and takes over from daylight. The village of Pluckley is referenced on page 13 in the Domesday Book of 1086 and is also listed in the Guinness Book of Records as being the most haunted village in the entirety of Great Britain, with a staggering 12, possibly 13 or even 14 ghostly apparitions reported around various locations of the village. And in this video I will concentrate on some of the more common of sightings in and around the village of Pluckley. The highwayman. The countryside of Pluckley was ideal for highwaymen, as it was on the main coaching route between Smarden and Charing, and according to both locals and reports, a horse-drawn carriage along with a clip-clop of horses' hooves and the unmistakable clamour of a highwayman believed to be making his escape are said to haunt Maltman's Hill. Back in 1997, Peggy Theobald and her husband Frank were driving home after visiting their children and grandchildren in the nearby village of Betherston. The time was approximately 12:15 a.m, and upon reaching the Smarden Road junction they noticed lights quickly approaching from the left. Then all of a sudden, to their amazement, it passed them by. It was not a car, but a horse-drawn carriage with no driver. We just watched it out of the window with our mouths wide open. Then all of a sudden, like a puff of smoke, it just disappeared into nothing and nowhere. In 1999, Angela Taylor was babysitting her brother's two children and was preparing their supper in the kitchen when she heard a clattering outside. As she pulled back the curtain, she could not believe what she was seeing. Coach and horses clambering up Maltman's Hill, and then just before it reached the halfway point, it simply disappeared. Possibly linked to the two previous reported sightings is the very aptly named Fright Corner, which is also a place that had received numerous reports of ghost activity. It is said that a spectre of a highwayman hides in an overhanging old oak tree, waiting to pounce on his next unintended victim. Folklore states that the highwayman was killed on Fright Corner in the mid-18th century after getting into a fight with the peacekeepers of the village. He put up a tremendous and spirited fight by all accounts, but was finally overpowered and killed with the cold sharp steel of several swords. His last desperate battle is, from time to time, spiritually reenacted before those unfortunate enough to pass the very spot at the very time during dark winter evenings. There are also reports of the highwayman's lifeless body slumped forwards and pinned to the very same oak tree to where he took his last breath. In November 1994, Raymond Breakspear, a taxi driver, had just dropped off two young ladies in Pluckley. He had picked them up from a nightclub in Maidstone. It was approximately 2:45 a.m. and he needed to make his way back to Maidstone when on the corner of the Black Horse pub he was flagged down by a figure dressed all in black. Raymond thought bonus, a return fare. The door opened and in got the dark figure. Raymond reset his meter and pulled away. He asked the passenger, "Where do you want to be, Gov?" No reply was forthcoming. He then turned round and was shocked to see that there was now nobody in the back of the taxi. The Derring Woods, more commonly known as Screaming Woods, is a heavily forested area just outside the village of Pluckley and is reported to be rife with both spectral sightings and the terrifying screams of long-dead men, women and children. It is an eerie experience to walk the muddy paths, zigzagging through the many skeletal trees, especially when doing so in the darker hours. The chillingly titled Screaming Woods certainly lives up to its very appropriate name, with considerable encounters of ghostly apparitions, screaming sounds and heavy footsteps regularly reported. The ghost of a soldier impeccably dressed and marching along the path that runs through the woods has been reported on numerous occasions. Many people to this very day visit Screaming Woods at night, and reports indicate that ghost activity is still very much active, and not just during the darker hours. You don't have to go deep into the forest to see or hear something unnerving, and it is claimed that there is no certain area which has spooky goings on. It's generally all over the woodland. The Wandering Cavalier. The old public house known as the Blacksmith's Arms can boast not one, not two, but three apparent ghosts. Previously called both the Spectre's Arms and the Ghost's Arms due to it having so many reported hauntings, and the strange happenings are still going on within its old walls to this very day. Among the reported figures that have been seen in the pub are a Tudor maid, an old coachman who it is claimed gazes longingly at the wood fire in the public bar, a cavalier who aimlessly wanders around the upstairs guest rooms, and the Blacksmith's Arms isn't the only reported public house to be haunted in Pluckley. The Black Horse also has its fair share of ghostly sightings. The pub, which used to be a farmhouse belonging to the local bailiff and which used to be surrounded by a moat, is famous for things magically disappearing right in front of people. But it seems the ghost has somewhat of a conscience, as a few days after the items disappear, they miraculously reappear. Dickybus's Lane. It may look like the perfect place for a tranquil country stroll, but Dickybus's Lane is anything but tranquil. Richard Dickybus was a well-known figure in the village last century, and the miller is said to now haunt the village's now ruined and abandoned windmill, the Pinnocks. Dicky closed his mill early in 1930, and 9 years later it was completely destroyed in a violent storm. However, it seems Dicky still has some unfinished business at the mill. He is normally spotted during or just before a thunderstorm is due to hit. St. Nicholas Graveyard. I think we can all agree that there are a few places spookier than a cemetery, and Pluckley's is even more terrifying than most. Lady Derring, who was buried in the graveyard of the local church, St. Nicholas, in a coffin made of red lead, and there have been many reported sightings of a spectre wandering the graveyard at night, wailing and appearing to be distressed. Lady Derring is said to be frantically searching for the grave of her stillborn baby. A lady in white is also said to stalk the church and the library of her old family home, Surrendon House. This grand house was destroyed in a blaze in 1952, but her spirit was reportedly seen by staff from the United States Embassy, who used the property as a base between World War I and World War II. And one employee even held an all-night vigil one Christmas Eve in 1943, and when the lady in white appeared in front of him, he panicked and shot at her with his rifle. The Smoking Gypsy. Pinnock Bridge is the perfect spot to sit and take in the stunning surroundings as you watch the world slowly go by, whether you're alive or dead. And the bridge is said to be haunted by a gypsy woman who eked out a meagre living gathering watercress and selling it to the local villagers. She was a well-known local character around Pluckley and considered eccentric but harmless. Each night as the sun went down, she would sit on the walls of the Pinnock Bridge smoking her clay pipe and drinking gin. She was accused of stealing and practicing in witchcraft, resulting in her being burned to death by the locals. The gypsy woman appears as a misty figure who never speaks. She simply sits there smoking her pipe, seemingly without a care in the world. The Dering family and the Church of St. Nicholas. There are a number of locations around the village of Pluckley that have a strange feel to them, and several of these haunted locations are connected to the Dering family, lords of the manor from the 15th century until World War I. An intriguing remnant of their tenure can be seen in the round-topped windows that grace so many of the beautiful buildings. During the Civil War, Lord Dering escaped capture by Cromwell's forces when he dived headfirst through a round-top window, and when he later came to rebuild his manor house, he commemorated the feat by having every window built in the same style, round-topped, and this in turn was copied throughout the village. Sadly, the house itself burnt down, but many houses you pass on the walk still feature this reminder of his endeavour. Located at the top of the first aisle in St. Nicholas's Church, which is over 900 years old, is the Dering Chapel, and this is where most members of the Dering family lie buried. A strange collection of what is said to be dancing lights has frequently been seen in the upper section of the window to your right, which is often accompanied by the sound of knocking coming from the family vault beneath your feet. In the early 1970s, in the hope of recording supernatural phenomena, a group of psychic researchers persuaded the then rector, the Reverend John Pittock, to allow them to spend a night locked inside the church. The Reverend Pittock often performed exorcisms in the village and had a keen interest in the paranormal, so had no problem with the enthusiastic researchers' request. Armed with their cameras, tape recorders, thermometers, and paranormal apparatus of the time, they nervously settled down to wait, watch, and listen. When the vicar came to let them out the next morning, they complained of having spent an uneventful night at the church, but nevertheless thanked the vicar for his hospitality regarding the hot tea. "What hot tea are you referring to?" said the vicar. "The tea your good lady wife brought us last night," said one of the researchers, to which the vicar commented, "My wife died in 1961, and I did not send you any tea." Greystones House. Greystones House was constructed in 1863 and was initially called Rectory Cottage, as it was the residence of the then rector of St. Nicholas Church. It is reputedly haunted by a monk by the name of Aranya, who has also been seen drifting among the surrounding trees on the grounds of the house. He lived in Tudor times and is said to have fallen in love with the daughter of a powerful lord whom died under tragic circumstances. This resulted in Aranya sinking into a state of melancholy and bitterness. His only solace was to walk the beautiful green fields and leafy paths where they had enjoyed so many romantic moments together. But as time passed, Aranya sank deeper into depression, pining for his long-lost love. he finally died of a broken heart. Today, Greystones House most famous resident is said to be the ghost of Aranya, who thinks nothing of throwing cups, plates, books, in fact anything, at those he perceives to be invading his home. He was last seen in 1989 by an American journalist walking up the main staircase at Greystones House with his head in his hands. My conclusion? I think the village of Pluckley is without doubt a very eerie place to be, especially during the darker hours, and its sheer amount of reported sightings by various people at various locations should make even the most entrenched of disbelievers think twice. Thank you for joining me in our latest edition of Scary Stories. I do hope that you enjoyed. And if you did enjoy, I would ask that you like, share and subscribe. Please feel free to leave a comment. I read and respond to them all, eventually. And as always, be safe and sweet dreams.